ever have a question about your cunt that you were too embarrassed to pose? Like, if I don't have sex for the next 8 years, will my pussy hole close? Well, buckle up, school's in session. These sex pros have planned a lesson, cause cunts aren't just for reproduction. Whether you were born with it or it's under construction, open your ears, cause the Clam Jam's got you covered. The Clam Jam.
Hello, and welcome to the Clam Jam. I'm Vienna, the consultant, your host, as always. Thanks for joining if you're watching this live or if you are watching this recording. We're happy you're here. So today we are joined by, as always, another consultant in their own right. Kristen Portney is here to talk about some of my favorite subjects regarding abortion, because you know we love to talk about abortion. It's not the only thing, but we love to talk about abortion. Kristen, I met at Spirit Weavers Gathering a few years ago, where she was leading a workshop on like ending multiple abortion stigma, or like around multiple abortions. And I love what she had to share on that. I think it's a really important conversation to have, because there's like, I think sometimes with pro-choice dialogue, it tends to go to like, abortion is okay if or but if you have more than one, like what's wrong with you, right? So there is some stigma inherent in that. So I'm excited to talk about that with her, and also her work as someone who provides abortion support, which I'm all about that. So without further ado, welcome Kristen. Hello.
Hey, hi Vienna.
Thanks for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Lovely to see you. Would you like to tell the people a little bit about yourself, because you have many credentials, and please share.
Yes, thank you. Well, again, I'm Kristen, and I am a psychotherapist, and I have a platform called Abortion Wheel, which is offering my services actually through coaching and counseling, so that I can reach people outside of the great state of California. And I've been sort of tending to my own post-abortion experience, also studying, researching, talking to people, and holding post-abortion support groups over the last, how old am I? I'm 33. Really since I was 18, which was when my first abortion happened. So it's been pretty much half my life that I've been sort of in this deep inquiry about what happens after abortion. Where do I fit into my own value system, which was, you know, obviously aligned with being pro-choice, but felt very, felt excluded at different times, especially as I started to have more than one abortion. So I became super curious about how to destigmatize the multiple abortion experience within the pro-abortion, pro-choice sort of camp, arena, whatever you want to call it. And then really focusing my studies through counseling psychology on offering support to folks post-abortion, which is also an area which, for me, in my experience of needing post-abortion support, really didn't find much of. And still actually feel like there isn't much support for people post-abortion, because the post-abortion experience really kind of like lies dormant in most people, and definitely as a culture as well. So I think that it's kind of like a time where a lot of people are starting to share their stories, and we're starting to hear more about how dynamic and complex and hard having an abortion is, and how that's okay and doesn't need to shouldn't threaten, obviously, our access to safe and affordable abortion services.
Yeah, I love all that. I mean, I feel like my own work is doing like abortion doula work, and just like being involved in this community. I do think it's such an underserved population. It's like, there's all this there's definitely a parallel. There's always a parallel with birth, right? Like there's always in the level of care that people are receiving, and what's cared about and when it's cared about. But with abortion, like we have a lot of like hype around either the access or the denying of access to the act itself, to the procedure itself. And then it's just like, there's total drop off, right? It's like all the fury on it. And it's just like, well, as long as it was complete, that's it. But as you said, it can be so much more than that. And people have all kinds of feelings about abortion, obviously, but even the people who have them, and at different times and for different reasons. And even if you feel like you're not coerced into making a decision, it still can be a challenging decision, or it can be a decision that like was no big deal. It really goes either way. Regardless, you need all kinds of support. So there's lots of things we want to talk about, but maybe we start there. So if you can talk more about like the counseling that you provide people right now and how what you do fits into a new model of care, I guess, for people who receive abortions.
Sure. Well, the support I offer really, I mean, you said it really well. It's like there's the experience of having an abortion that can be really challenging, difficult. There can be, and it's totally normal to experience a wide range of experience or feelings post-abortion, including grief and loss. And so I think that one is kind of like the heavy hitter of like, oh no, if I'm experiencing grief or if I'm experiencing a sense of loss or sadness or depression, does that mean that my abortion was wrong or that abortion is wrong in general? So I think that there's like a risk that is sort of inherent in speaking honestly about abortion, because it can kind of like add fuel to the fire of people being like, see, abortion's bad. You're having a challenging time after abortion. And really wanting to create space for people where, so this is like kind of like one arm of the counseling that I do, to just even name that there might be grief after, like that in and of itself is like it was for me a really radical act in my own self-care and my own sort of like becoming aware of what my feelings were after the abortion. And then there's the other arm, and then there's many arms in between, but of like, okay, I made the choice to have my abortion and everything went seemingly well. I'm really glad I made that choice. The experience in and of itself wasn't traumatizing or hard, or I was able to have access. I had the funds to have an abortion. My partner was supportive. And that even in that place, there's still a lot of information that can be explored. So that kind of part I call more of like post-abortion integration. So there's more maybe like acute counseling to offer folks who are in an acute state. And that could be a week after their abortion, but that could still be a year or a couple years after their abortion when they're holding on to challenging feelings that maybe they've never even spoken to themselves before.
Yeah.
And then like going back to the integration piece of like, I really feel in my own experience and what I see in people who have abortion is that they get sort of robbed of their emotional experience. So whenever we go through something hard or transformational, whether it be having a baby or going through a breakup or moving or having some sort of loss in your life, that I think we know in other circumstances that there's a need to sort of have a space to talk about it, whether it's with friends or family or someone, a therapist or a coach, to get support and kind of get that like psychic gold that can be there, because there's actually a lot to be learned after an abortion. So for me, I see it as sort of this like really like creative and interesting time to be able to reflect and either see like, what did I learn about my relationship? What did I learn about my body? What did I learn about my friends who are around me? Because now I'm seeing maybe that I don't have the support that I had, or maybe I do, or I'm being surprised in whatever way. So I think that's kind of, those are the services that I'm offering through counseling with Abortion Wheel.
Yeah. I mean, there's so many things you just said in there that I want to go back to. Like the term psychic gold is great. And I love thinking about that in terms of abortion, especially just like there's so much psychic gold there. Like, wow. But I also just like to backtrack a little bit further and to just hone in. Having complicated feelings about something doesn't mean that it doesn't make it good or bad. It's just complicated. And again, like other parallels, right? There are lots of people who like fully want to have children and have children and then have very complicated feelings about having those children. And grief is something that is really hard for people to talk about. Yes. But I think it's still part of like, because, with abortion, it's the obvious parallel, right? But postpartum, any kind of postpartum, right? You can feel like, I have lost my life. What do I do now? Like all my freedom is gone. So just to say that just because you have complicated feelings about something, just because you don't have just one note feeling about something, doesn't necessarily make that mean that it's good or bad or was the wrong or right choice.
Exactly.
I think it's, I love that you bring that up. And there's all kinds of things we have complicated choices and feelings about, right? Like, and there's a way that I think people talk about abortion and like sex, and like especially like sex in a religious setting where it's like sex before marriage is wrong, or young people having sex is really wrong because like you could get hurt. It's like you could get hurt playing soccer. Like but we don't have the same have the same storyline about soccer versus abortion.
Mm-hmm. No, absolutely. And I think with abortion, like this really interesting timeline is given to it from I guess more from like the medical model. It's like, okay, you choose to terminate the pregnancy, you schedule the abortion, either you go to the clinic or you're having a self-managed abortion at home, which can look many different ways, as I'm sure you know, and then it's over.
Yeah, that's
okay?
it.
So you're no longer pregnant. And then there's sort of this feeling of like, okay, moving on. Now I'm like going back into life exactly as I was before. But really, I mean, to go from being pregnant to not being pregnant there's a huge adjustment that goes on hormonally and in our body. And so there's a sort of like a catching up that needs to happen. And in my own experience, particularly after my second abortion, it was really jarring to just kind of like look around and be like, okay, I need to just step back into my life as it was. And when I couldn't do that, when I was really struggling to fit my own feelings into the box of my decision was right, therefore I feel okay, therefore I'm fine, therefore there's no bad feelings, because that would mean what? That would mean I'm like betraying the pro-choice movement. And those were questions I was asking myself. Like I was like, oh my gosh, there must be something wrong with me. It wasn't like I thought that there was something wrong with my choice, but I was like, there must be something wrong with me because I'm supposed to just be okay and step back into my life, which in my first abortion actually was more or less my experience. It was like, I was much younger. I was 18. There was all this sort of validation around me of like, of course, like you're just starting college. This is, a normal like time to have an abortion, right? Like you're young, you're just starting your life. You're not married, whatever it is. So like, that's where I first started to notice that there's sort of like a pass you get in the abortion world. And it's like, what's your past? Is your past like you were really young and inexperienced and you weren't in a solid relationship, so of course you're not ready to have a family? Was it because you were sexually assaulted, so like, and the result was a pregnancy and a termination, so like of course, like yes, you deserve access to have an abortion? And then there's like a gradient of all these things and all these ways that we also, as the person having the abortion, sort of validate our own experience or make it okay. And usually it's to make it okay to fit into the larger narrative that's going on culturally and socially.
Yeah. Yeah. And I that's a really excellent point. I mean, it reminds me of like conversations around hormonal birth control. Being a fertility awareness educator, it invariably comes up where you're like, hormonal birth control really fucks up your body. But that doesn't mean we don't want you to have the pill, but it easily like can become that argument. Like, well, there's something wrong with this thing that's already controversial, and therefore we shouldn't do it at all because we must protect people. But really you're just trying to control them. But I think, what you're speaking to of this another level of acceptance and just like, how am I doing this right? Will people judge me? That makes a lot of sense, I think, just like from our cultural narratives about it, but is not something that's talked about, right? Like there's this conversation of like, you deserve to have an abortion, but then if you disclose to someone like, well, I had an abortion when I was 18. Oh, we get that. But I had an abortion when I was 38 and I had 3 other children and I chose to like not use any kind of birth control in my committed relationship, or like I was cheating on my husband, or like on any of these, if we like start to have these different scenarios, there's more people like, well, that was like maybe the wrong choice. Like, how could you? Or whatever it is. There's definitely passes. That's a good way to put it.
Yeah, it's like you get to be like irresponsible when you're 18. And like, because I think that for me has been one of the more like stigmatizing and hurtful words that I've come across in my experience of having abortion, and particularly having multiple abortions, is people reflecting like that there must be something irresponsible about me. And so it's like, well, that's not true. but there are certain situations where people are like, okay, well, you get a pass for being young, you get a pass for like doing this. But then once you step into your later 20s or your 30s or your 40s or maybe even your 50s, and then you start to be in like a committed relationship or not, or whatever it is, then people are really looking at you trying to find the fault. And I think what was surprising to me and what kind of was like, whoa, there's a huge stigma within the pro-choice, pro-abortion field, is that there were people, it wasn't so much like, I mean, of course I never like being called a baby murderer, like that never feels good, but it's like, for me, it's so extreme and it's so far off of like how I identify or what I think my experience is, that it doesn't land in the same kind of way as feeling like stigmatizing or hurtful. But it was actually from people around me who I would start to like test, like, who can I tell that I've had an abortion? Okay, now here's this friend who's disclosing that they've had an abortion. They're telling me about their experience. I haven't said yet that I've had more than one. And then somewhere in the conversation, it turns to, well, but if you have more than one, you're doing something wrong.
Right.
And then it's like, whoa, okay. That lands and hits in like in a really different way. And then obviously the safety isn't there to share about the multiple abortions that have happened. And also, I mean, probably from my own perspective of being a therapist, like I can look back at those times and see the way that it ties into like someone's own need to validate and make their experience okay. Because I'll also say that I've been there, like after my second abortion, when I've heard that people had more than two, I was like a little bit relieved. I was like, okay, like maybe I've done like, I'm like this bad, but I'm not like that bad.
Sure. Yeah.
You know? And then it wasn't until I had my third one that it just like totally blew everything I thought I knew about abortion and abortion stigma just wide open. It was just like, you know what, there's no cap to how many abortions one could, should, would have. And how many is really too many.
Yeah. I mean, I say that, I think like something, you know, we don't really, I guess this is true. Actually, we judge people for their choices around children constantly. We do it for all kinds of people for all kinds of different reasons. I mean, one of the reasons I prefer or like reproductive justice as a lens is that it doesn't say like, it doesn't stop at like whether or not you have the right to have an abortion, right? Where pro-choice tends to be centered around the choice of whether you become a parent or whether you don't become a parent, whether you continue a pregnancy or whether you don't, which is like a moment in time. And reproductive justice speaks to like the entire lifespan of like your choice to be a parent or not, your choice, your autonomy over your own body, and the ability to raise those children with safety and dignity. And it also is just like an inherent judgment of when people and why people choose to have children. Right. And so we're always like trying to say, well, you're doing it right and you're doing it wrong. You have not enough kids. You have too many kids. And I think in the same way that like, for me, my choice would not be to have 5 children, but for some people, that's like exactly what they want. And there's nothing inherently wrong with that. Right.
Absolutely.
And same thing with like multiple abortions. And it just continues to like shame people and like, is it useful? Like, what is the use of this? I think I also want to say briefly, and we don't have to spend all of our time on this, but like there's all kinds of reasons that someone would end up having multiple abortions. And there's all kinds of like this narrative, because you're absolutely right, of course. And we all know this, if you point it out, there is this level of irresponsibility that goes through it, right? Like you are making sexual decisions that are irresponsible because they resulted in a pregnancy you didn't want.
Yes.
The fact of the matter is all birth control methods fail. The only thing that's really going to ever prevent you from never getting pregnant is either never having sex or never having sex with someone with semen, if you have a uterus and functioning ovaries, or removing your equipment. And that's it. Everything else has a failure rate. Even vasectomies have a failure rate occasionally. Even tubal ligations can have a failure rate. So this idea, like there's all kinds of stories of people who are on several different kinds of birth control and they still got pregnant. So nature will find a way. So that element of like irresponsibility, if we're judging on like, are you using birth control appropriately? You can use it appropriately. They all have a failure rate. And regardless, that's such a strange barometer to be like, the only thing about you, the thing that defines you as responsible or irresponsible is if you end up pregnant. We all, like most of us are having sex. A lot of us are having sex with people who can make a baby with us biologically. historically, it's not a thing that we've ever been like, abortion's already always existed, right? So like our right to determine when a baby exists or not, I believe is a fundamental human right, as proved through history. But just to say that, like this level, if people are listening to this and being like, well, why didn't you use a condom? Condoms fail. Why aren't you on the pill? The pill fails. IUD fails. Like all these things fail. So
sure. And then yeah, and then, you know, my favorite is when people ask me, is like, well, actually I wasn't using birth control at the time.
Yeah.
And then it's like you can watch the empathy and sympathy drop, like levels within friends or with people who would identify as being supportive, as like, it's like they're ticking off this like checklist of like what did you do to prevent this, and like how sorry can I feel for you, like based on the idea of like what I think would like be like shocking, or like, oh my God, like you were on an IUD and you got pregnant, like, well, that's not your fault because you were still trying to do everything that you could do. But then if you just weren't using birth control in that period of time and get pregnant, then I don't know. It's like the barometer, and people are just like, well, I don't feel bad for you. And it's not even about like looking for pity or anything, but it's looking for compassion. It's looking for understanding. And hopefully that someone, especially people who are in your community or who are your peers or your friends, would just be at least curious to hear about your experience.
Well, and also to say, you know, at the end of the day, what it's saying is like, you fucked up. So your punishment is you have a baby. So you fucked up and now you have to have this baby. And if you choose not to have that baby, then like there's something bad about you. Or if you chose to have that baby, same thing, like caught in the sunlight over here. You know, like same punishment, where someone who perhaps we didn't think as a society should be having a baby at that point has a baby. Well, why didn't you have an abortion? Or why didn't you choose to like use birth control or whatever it is? And it's the same. At the end of the day, what you're saying is that if you get pregnant, you have to stay pregnant if you don't do it correctly, which ultimately means children are a punishment for having sex.
Yeah.
Not a good standard to set up child rearing.
No, and I appreciate the language that you're using, and it's not language that everybody does use, but it's like the outcome of a pregnancy, whether it's wanted or unwanted, and you go and you end up birthing the baby, is that you become a parent.
Yeah. Like, even if you get, and then, you know, like, okay, you give the child up for adoption.
Yeah.
Sure, that is an option, but it's not like that's ideal either necessarily. I mean, it's just hard. It's hard. All these things are hard. At the end of the day, it's all hard.
No, it's really hard. And I think like, no, and as probably anyone who's ended up having an abortion, for sure more than one, it's like, I mean, I look back at my younger self and you never like think that you're going to be someone who has 2, 3, 4, 5 abortions. It's not in anyone's plan to do so. But then you find yourself there. And I mean, for me, when I think about the choice to have an abortion, like you could have all these ideas, you could talk to people and hear about it and think you know what you're going to do until you're in the situation and you're kind of like standing on the edge of, am I going to like go down the path and carry this pregnancy full term, and whatever outcome might come there, maybe adoption, maybe parenting, or am I going to have an abortion? And so when you find yourself there again and again, it's the same thing. Like you don't know what you're going to do. I told myself after my first abortion, I would never have an abortion again. After my second abortion, I would never have an abortion again. I've said it to myself even again after the third one, but then I have to laugh at myself sometimes and be like, Kristen, well, I think you actually don't really know what you would do.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then the truth is I don't know what the circumstances would be. It's impossible to tell. I could have some ideas. I could feel in myself like my own availability or my own readiness or resource, like how resourced I might be. But the truth is you really don't know until you're in the situation.
Yeah.
Which is why it also is so frustrating when there's so many people commenting on abortion who really just have no context for how complex and how stressful it is to find yourself pregnant when you don't want to be pregnant.
Yeah, it's incredibly stressful because it's one of those things where it's like you have to make a decision rather quickly. Like there's a time limit, and it's not a very long time limit. Even legally wise, like depending on what's actually accessible. But I wonder, I think like you don't really know what you're going to do in a situation until you find yourself in that situation. Mm-hmm. And even then, like I always counsel people, like you should have this conversation with your partner or any partners that you have. Mm-hmm. If the sex you're having could result in a pregnancy, what do you think you both would do? And that being said, it doesn't mean that's what you will do, but at least have like thinking about it a little bit. Mm-hmm. But you're right. Like the fact is you just don't know, and you don't know what will happen and when it will happen and what you will do in that situation. Yeah. And even with people who, have very strong anti-abortion feelings, they might not, they maybe have had an abortion, or maybe they wouldn't know what they would do either in that situation. And I think that's true for everyone. So I wonder, when we're going back to like, just that sidebar of like, people get pregnant, like it's how your body works. If you're having that kind of sex that can result in a pregnancy, it'll happen at some point in most cases, not always, right? Like lots of caveats in there.
Sure.
It's a natural function of the human body. Just those are the facts. But what you want to do with that pregnancy is a choice.
Yeah.
Should be a choice.
And actually, when we met at Spirit Weavers, and I think it was me, you, and Marissa, and maybe even Corinne, who were on that, we had like a panel discussion. Yeah. And I forget who said it, but I remember it came up then of just like how also the uterus is made to also release. Exactly. So like, just as normal as it is and to get pregnant, like a function of the uterus is to release. And that's actually not going against the biology of the uterus and how it can shed and let go and expand and birth.
100%. Thank you for saying that. I mean, going back, like Samantha Zapora, who I'm sure you're familiar with, but she was on Clam Jam a while ago. And, she's the one who I believe coined the phrase pregnancy release. And you just call it a pregnancy release, be it a full-term birth, be it miscarriage, stillbirth, birth, or abortion. Those are all pregnancy releases. It is the releasing of a pregnancy. And biologically, it is all the same. Like you're going through a birth process.
Yeah. And it doesn't hurt for that, because that was a milestone in terms of my own understanding of abortion in the body. It was, Yeah, it's like a function. I mean, the other thing to say too, it's like menstruation, like unless it's there was also some kind of pregnancy that happened or conception, but for most of us on a monthly basis, your uterus is releasing. And that is, again, like most of the time things are coming out. And something else to keep in mind there. And then also, I mentioned it briefly, but for all of human history, we have been managing pregnancy with abortion. Yes. And our ability to do that has changed over time, but it is documented. It is really like ultimately, it was the birth control that we had in most cases. Find yourself pregnant, you don't want to be pregnant for whatever reason, and you could use herbs, whatever was that where you are, what people were using. And then infanticide was like a classic way that we dealt with unwanted pregnancies as well. And they are different things. Infanticide and abortion are not the same. They are very, very different. They are very different.
And again, thank God we have better access to abortion now, and infanticide isn't the choice, right? So just throw that out there too. It is like, it's not unnatural. Like abortion is not an unnatural act in both the human species and in the animal world at large. And those are facts, guys. Those are facts.
Those are facts. I mean, it's the life cycle, right? I mean, and it's like, and I know it can be a bit charged to use that, particularly talking about abortion, and because it is unique to everyone in terms of like how the language that they use, right? In terms of the fetus, the cells, the baby, like everyone has a different comfort level, the spirit, the energy, whatever it might be that feels most comfortable and validating to their experience of their abortion, and that there is an inherent receiving and an inherent letting go when an abortion happens. And so, we're talking about really just like the basic functions of life. And so people who have had miscarriage, who have given birth, who have had abortion are deeply in touch with this really sort of like soulful process. And which is another reason why it's like, to me, it's so interesting, and it deserves to have so much more space and more support and so much more language to talk about it too.
Yeah.
So that people can feel like you've really like touched something when you've been pregnant or no longer. You've been in a pregnant body. That is it's not a unique experience, but it might be a unique experience for you if it's your first time or second time. Maybe the second time you were pregnant a couple weeks or 3 weeks longer than the first time. And that opens up a whole different world of experiencing your body and your relationship to self. So I think that there's just like to me, it feels like this, like what I hope to do, like, and also the counseling is just to really invite people to explore that in the fullest way possible for them.
Yeah. So let's talk more about the counseling. Let's talk about like, because I'm just thinking like someone's listening to this and maybe they're like, yes, I'm on board for abortion, but like, what do I do? So if someone is like considering their options around, do I keep this pregnancy, or how do I feel about this pregnancy? Is that something you can help people like feel their way through? Is that something you support them through? Or is it primarily like during like procedural and post?
Yeah. So my real area of like expertise and where I'm sort of fitting myself in is really post-abortion. So offering support to folks who need any kind of support around integration or making sense of, well, identifying, being witness in their feelings, and then processing their feelings. And I mean, through the counseling, then being resourced, ideally, to be able to move forward in whatever way that they need to move forward in their lives, so that they feel like they aren't repressing anything, pushing anything down, denying themselves of their feelings or their experience. I think ultimately that's kind of like what therapy likes to do, right? It's like let's like bring things up so that they can be integrated and held. And so that you're kind of like reclaiming more and more parts of yourself as you walk forward in your life. And sometimes abortion is something that gets dropped all the way over there. And it's like, maybe you need to go back and pick it up and look at it so that you're moving forward more fully. I know for myself, it's like, for me, like my abortions are such a huge part of my life, and they're a big part of my career, of my personal identity, and also of how I've really like deepened my relationship with myself. So for people who are in the contemplation phase of their abortion, I would probably refer them to some of the like sea change or places where they can receive counseling for their, discovery of what they want to do. Probably another area that is lacking. Yeah.
I would agree. Yeah. So there's so many good things you're saying. So when someone, like the integration experience, can you speak more to like what that might look like for someone? I think like what we've already touched on, like integrating complicated feelings and understanding that you can have complicated feelings and still be secure in your choice. Or if someone just like feels very conflicted, if you could speak more to that, either like with your clients or even if your own experience, if you want to share that.
Sure. Yeah. Oh, sorry. I mean, I think that like first, and one of the gifts that I've experienced in psychotherapy, both as a therapist and as a client, is just to be witnessed in a challenging feeling can feel like a huge relief. I think it's like never to be underestimated to tell someone who receives a story from you in a safe and compassionate and open-hearted, non-judgmental way. So like that at the baseline is just like I could just feel like an exhale in that space. And then being validated for the wide range of feelings. So I think like once people are able to be honest with themselves about how they're feeling post-abortion, opens up just a whole new avenue to moving forward and feeling integrated. And I guess what I mean by feeling integrated is just that sometimes it's like we have these experiences, and especially if there's maybe more trauma involved, there's like these like kinks that kind of happen in our timelines, and we don't know how to make sense of them, or maybe we're experiencing symptoms related to the stress or the trauma, hypervigilant, where maybe we're uncomfortable with our body, we're feeling like we can't have sex again because of the abortion, we're traumatized by the medical care that we received because it was maybe uncaring or also stigmatizing and harmful in some way. Or there was a rupture between the partners in the relationship, or they weren't received by their family. So all these things like need a place to go, and they need a safe space to be expressed, and then hopefully moving forward. And so some of the ways that you can do that is through different rituals around grieving. So offering someone ideas of like how to be witness in their grief, of how to honor their grief and their loss. That could be with like altar making. It could be just like finding a place to express their emotions, whether like crying or journaling. And then another area that I find to be really helpful is finding something kind of creative to do. Because there is also like a creative impulse after one's been pregnant. There's all this energy and hormones, and the body was creating and now it's no longer. And so I think sometimes like getting your hands in some clay, painting, writing, singing, are like beautiful aids and sort of medicines in the healing or like supportive process post-abortion.
Yeah, that's psychic gold again. Like, is that
psychic gold?
Psychic gold. I just like it.
Yeah, I mean, and just telling people like, hey, like there's this experience that you had, and it may have been really hard. It's also a very powerful experience. It's also like you just made a huge decision for yourself, and you should probably feel really proud of that, because it's not an easy decision to make. And to make a choice, to make any kind of choice, is hard.
Yeah.
I can be
in the morning.
I can be super indecisive. So the fact that you, like, in this high stress situation, made the best choice for yourself that you could deserves like a huge round of applause, and is actually really remarkable.
Yeah. Well, also go back again, Samantha Zipporah, she comes up all the time, but she said some good things. And like this concept of like the sacred yes, like what are you saying yes to? Because often we phrase it as like, what are you saying no to? You're saying no to a pregnancy, but that's not the whole story. The story is you're saying yes to something else, and you can't do everything at once. So you're saying yes to this other part of your life and no to this other potential option.
Yep, exactly.
Yeah.
Yep.
So I think like grief is such an interesting, not interesting, but I want to talk more about grief is what I'm trying to say. Because I think in context of abortion, especially, again, as we've already said, like if you don't regret it, but you are sad about it, that is really complicated for people to sit in. And it's also complicated to say out loud. And it's complicated because you don't, if you say that, right, if you say publicly or in some way, like I had an abortion and I stand by my decision, but I am very sad about it, the level of judgment that you will get from people being like, well, you made the wrong choice, you're a bad person, clearly like something went wrong. That's actually, I think, fairly common for people to feel a variety of experiences. So could we speak like a little bit more about grief? And if someone watching this is like in that state of being like, I know the choice I made was like the choice that I had to make or I wanted to make, but I still like feel grief. And so how does grief fit into a pregnancy? Like another way to say like a pregnancy loss could be another way to put it, right?
Yeah.
It's not a miscarriage. It's something that you actively participated in the ending of a pregnancy. And so I think a lot of people would say, well, you're not allowed to feel sad about it because you made a choice. Can we talk more about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that there are also some people who are making the decision to have an abortion who really actually do want to have a baby, or prior to this unexpected pregnancy, were really looking forward to becoming a parent. And then now they found themselves pregnant, and all of a sudden their partner is no longer supportive, or their family is harassing them to have an abortion because of XYZ, or the partner is harassing them, or they're going to leave you, or whatever it might be that's going to cause some great instability. So you take all that information, you look around your environment and your relations and see like, is this the right, can I bring in a child right now with all these no's around me? And if I don't feel safe or supported, even though I really want to have a baby, and maybe if actually my outside circumstances were different, I would have gone through with this pregnancy. And so that's still a right, wise decision. Like anytime we're standing just in the moment of our lives, looking around, taking inventory and thinking like, do I go left or do I go right? And we've got to make a choice, and you make it, like, damn. And then when you're doing that with abortion, it's like so much more intense. And so after that experience, for someone, there might be a tremendous amount of grief and loss, because here they were with this opportunity to have a baby, which they really wanted, but the environment wasn't going to be conducive or supportive for them. And the reconciliation that kind of has to happen and take place there is a really daunting one of, I wanted this, but other things told me no, and ultimately I made this decision, and can I rest in that decision? And sometimes people can't rest in that decision. And there's a huge conflict, and there's a huge wish that things could have been different, and a hope that maybe things will be different in the future. And so there's a tremendous amount of sadness and loss and anger towards their partner, towards their family, towards their community, towards whatever the powers that be that may have led for them to make the decision to terminate the pregnancy. Mm-hmm. So grief in general, I think, is something that also in our culture is uncomfortable.
Yeah.
There aren't that many practices for how we support each other in our grief. And it's one of the more misunderstood emotional states, because there's all these really like great theories on grief and the different emotions that are associated with grief and different timelines for grief, and how grief is something that sometimes is with you your whole life. And it doesn't mean that it's always active, but it means that it can be activated, yeah. Right? So like the loss of a parent, the loss of any loved one, of a pet, like we may not be suffering every day for the rest of our lives, but there may be that anniversary, there might be that memory, that place that we go that evokes that feeling. And so the same can happen with a pregnancy loss. And I think that in that arena of folks who chose to have an abortion, there is more of the use around of baby also, like this was like my baby, and like that can be really uncomfortable for people to hear after the abortion experience. I think it's a little bit more comfortable when we medicalize the procedure, but also that is taking away from the person's own experience and sort of like autonomy in their experience of abortion. So if someone has had an abortion, it was they could see it as the right decision, but they are still talking about the loss of their baby, then like where are the spaces for us to say, like, how can we hold you there?
Yeah.
You and this baby that was lost.
Yeah. Yeah. I think I know people who name the baby, right? Mm-hmm. Who like even, they named it, and that was part of their integration process or their processing process of the abortion. And I know that can be very powerful for people, and some people don't want to do that at all. And so it really is different for everyone. But mm-hmm. I do think I always think there's something powerful in naming things, and just like emotions, feelings, whatever. So if that feels like a good practice to someone, I would encourage you to experiment with it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so the sadness, it's okay to just feel sad for yourself that you had to go through this really shitty, hard thing. I mean, it's even at its like the smoothest that it goes, it's like hard to coordinate. It's like you're not, before you go into your unexpected pregnancy, you're not like researching. Maybe some people are, but like, where would I go if like I need to have an abortion, which would actually be something that would be really great to have information just provide. But it's so, and then all of a sudden you're just in this overwhelming state, and then you're dealing with medical providers, you're getting, you might have to take time off work or whatever. It's just, there's so much that goes on in that short period of time.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so what do you do, and how do you process that, and how do you access it? And it's a lot. Yeah.
A lot. And where do you turn? Where do you turn where do you turn to be really heard in your full experience? Because there's, again, like what we're kind of talking about, to tie back to to the stigma, is like, you might think that you can turn to your pro-choice friends or this like platform on Instagram or whatever, but then really in your own lived experience, or the language that you're using, or the amount of abortions that you had, like suddenly you find yourself just even more isolated.
Yeah.
In a situation where it's wild to think how alone people feel when it's such a common experience.
Yeah. Yeah.
And one could bring so many people together, really.
Yeah. It's just something to be aware of. Like, again, if you're someone listening to this and you've had multiple abortions, you're okay. It's okay. Nothing is wrong with you. And if you're someone who is very uncomfortable with the thought of someone having multiple abortions, that's okay. That's a very common feeling as well. But perhaps consider how you might be perpetuating harm through that. Like, just be aware of the language you're using when you're talking to people. Perhaps reconsider your positions. I can't tell you what to think, but again, I think I remember going to this like Planned Parenthood conference on abortion stigmas and just saying, like, if at any point we are stigmatizing abortion, it is kind of like putting up if there's always a but after it, then you're not fully supporting people in their choice. And if you really do believe you are pro-abortion or pro-choice, I would just encourage people to examine some of the things that they feel like not as okay with. And again, abortion and infanticide, not the same thing. No one is here for infanticide. That's not what we're talking about. But this idea of like, well, why do I feel like this person was irresponsible? Or why do I feel like maybe I was irresponsible? Or whatever it is because that's a common feeling, or as we already talked about.
Yeah. And I mean, if someone has 3 abortions, 4 abortions, 5 abortions, it's no one's business and no one's job to from the outside look at that person and try to find the reason why that's happening, right? Like, not anyone's place to do that. Now, if the person who has experienced multiple abortions becomes curious and notices their own pattern and want to engage in like, hey, like, I'm noticing that like I'm having this experience over and over again, and I'm curious. I want to look at that. I wonder what's there.
Yeah.
Maybe there's nothing there, but maybe there's something there. I don't know. And that's kind of like, but that's like the own mining you get to do into your psyche and into your body and into your whole life, right? Because also in the abortion experience, I think it's really common, just like in how we know about birth can sort of ignite a trauma response or awaken even on a body level, just a memory of a childhood trauma or a trauma that was buried deep down many years ago. Abortion is really no different in that sense, in terms of just like the fly around here, the intimacy of the procedure and what can be evoked, and especially depending on who's providing the abortion to, and how supportive and safe or rude they're being, or whatever it might be. So, and then we also kind of talked about a little bit before we got on live is about relationships. And so I think that's another huge aspect, and especially for people in counseling, because ideally 2 people are on the same page making the decision to have the abortion, but that's not always the case. And I think can be a confusing time to be the partner who's not pregnant and is sort of like witnessing and maybe like doing their best to make a decision, or actually like putting the whole decision on the other person, which it is their decision if you're the person who's pregnant to decide what to do. But sometimes you might be looking at your partner being like, hey, give me your input. Like, what do you think? And that person might be in their own freeze response, or they might be overwhelmed, or they might be dissociated, or they might be having their own experience where they're not even really able to fully locate their feelings on the matter. And so there's also this sort of uncovering that might happen between 2 people after the abortion happens. And it doesn't mean they're not doing their best to communicate and be honest and support each other, but it's an overwhelming emotional experience.
Yeah. And like very different for 2 people to go through, right? Like if you're the one who's pregnant, not only do you have to make a decision about what's going to happen in that pregnancy, your body's also going through all this crazy stuff, hormonally. And then if you're the other half of the pregnancy, but you're not the pregnant body, that's a really, like, you can't feel into, like, you're having a different level of feeling because it's not happening in your body. But yeah, it can be like as charged. And yeah, so have you worked, like, I'm sure it is something you offer, but have you worked with clients who are the non-pregnant person in abortion?
I haven't. So actually I had many years ago now volunteered on Exhale on the post-abortion talk line. And that was actually the most contact I had with the non-pregnant partner who calling in either primarily usually being curious of how they can support their partner who had just gone through an abortion. And then sometimes too, needing support and needing a place to talk and to express their feelings and feeling really confused about any range of feelings that they're probably having after the abortion. So it's less common that those are folks that I work with, but from people that I've talked to and from my own experience, I know can be really challenging. And like, when's the right time for that person to share their feelings if it differs, or if they're having their own sense of loss or their own sense of whatever it might be, or they're like reflecting on their own participation in the decision-making process, and they might think now they may have done it differently.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the other thing. You're allowed to think that you would have done it differently after and you might do it differently the next time.
Yeah.
And you might make a different choice, and that's totally fine as well. But yeah, I think it can be confusing, and I think it's also like who's doing emotional labor for who in their relationship. But that doesn't mean that the other person, particularly if we're talking about a male-identified male body person, that they don't get to emote their feelings or what. But where does that go? That's a great question. I'm not fully sure. I think most people hold on to it and kind of shove it down, let it go, move on, whatever language they might use to describe how they just keep going forward after that.
Yeah, I think it is. I mean, it's complicated for everyone. And I think it's like a different kind of complicated for, like, again, like in a real, like, cis heteronormative situation, like for the man, the person with the sperm, right? And it is fully the right of the person who is pregnant to decide what to do with their body. But that, I can see how that could be very complicated for the other side of the equation. And especially if you are someone who believes in the autonomy of individuals, like you maybe wanted to be a parent, and like, here's an opportunity for you to be a parent, and you don't get to be the one who makes the ultimate decision here. And that can be really challenging.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it's also not a narrative that people want to hear you express, right? In the same way of like, you know, where it's like, I've had 5 abortions and I'm someone who has participated in 5 abortions, but I wanted to be a parent in all of those situations. Yeah.
And you never know. I mean, for a lot of if the people are couples, if they are in a relationship or not, but like, usually if we're thinking about just in this moment that these two people are in a relationship, maybe they've never even talked about the idea of having kids. Maybe they've only been together for 2 weeks. Maybe they've been together for 10 years and have never talked about what they really want for their future, want to have kids. And now you find yourself unexpectedly pregnant. This brings up a lot of stuff between couples.
Yeah, or if you thought for some reason you couldn't get pregnant and you're like, this is not even a conversation we're having, we doesn't matter, like we're just not having kids and we're fine with that and we can't, and then suddenly something happens. Yeah, what is that? Like that obviously, like, not what is that, but like I can imagine that being a very confusing or just tumultuous experience.
Yeah, I mean, but what is that? What is that conversation? What does it look like? Where do you have it? When do you have it? And you need support around that. I mean, individuals and couples alike need a lot of support at different times. And I think the more support that you can have during an experience of terminating a pregnancy, just the better.
Yeah. And it does, I think, in my own experiences with couples, like going through abortion, that can really, in some cases, like it makes you stronger and you're like aligned on that. And in other cases, it could be the reason that our relationship ends for a variety of reasons. It doesn't have to be like you had an abortion, I disagreed with you. It could be like this, like, is a catalyst moment. But again, because abortion somehow gets like this other box, same thing if you choose to have children, right? So it's not like it does seem like abortion is, you have the good choice, I'm going to back that all up. But there is like some kind of spectrum of saying like at a certain point, the right choice is to have a baby. And at another point, the right choice is to not have a baby. And if you're making a different choice according to what other people think you should be doing, you're therefore judged. And now I lost my train of thought there. But the idea of, I lost it. What was I saying? My sleep brain. But yeah, just the idea that it's complicated. It's normal to have complicated feelings. And again, all right, this is what I was gonna say. Like the choice to have children is also like an extremely stressful and life-changing moment. Even if, again, you're like, tried really hard for this baby, got this baby, that can also just feel like it destroys your life. That can feel like it's the biggest blessing of your life. That's what I was trying to say. It's like, it's not like having a child is like a better or worse choice than not having a child. And also the assumption that a pregnancy would result in a live birth is something that we take for granted, and that pregnancy would not result in some kind of irrevocable harm to yourself or someone else.
Yeah. Thank you for saying that, for bringing that up.
Yeah. And that I think that we always assume like the best case scenario is a scenario that's going to happen, which is, you know, like, let's not live in fear, but it's not always the case. And pregnancy can be very, very dangerous and can be very dangerous. It's not a pathology. Like, it's a natural thing that happens in your body. Your body knows how to do it. But also, like, as we also know, if, especially in the US and predominantly in the US, if you're a Black woman, if you're like a Black person with a uterus, your chances of like horrible things happening to you during your pregnancy, as in like loss of life even, are very, very high. Not a reason to not have a pregnancy, but part of, you know, this list of considerations when you are choosing to. And so yeah, no way to say like you shouldn't be pregnant because it's dangerous. It's just like, it's a consideration that things can go wrong, and they do go wrong sometimes.
Exactly. Because I mean, because all of these things are existing at the same time.
Yeah.
In the realm of pregnancy and whatever the outcome of the pregnancy may be. And to me, it's like, I mean, I feel like I've devoted really like my practice and my career to holding the nuance and like really being dedicated to just like swimming in the gray area, like no matter what, like, and hearing people out. And for me, like, that's like a really exciting and fulfilling and interesting place to be. And I recognize that it's deeply uncomfortable for many people because we want to know, did I do the right thing? Did I do the wrong thing? Am I a good person? Am I a bad person? Like, that impulse isn't terrible, because I think we all like face that at different times, like throughout our day. Like, yeah, like it's happening all the time. And whatever, like, I think something that's also interesting is like the feeling of like guilt. And so guilt is sort of inherent in any choice that we make, potentially. Because when we choose something, we're not choosing another thing. So you mentioned like Samantha's like sacred yes. So it's like we're saying no to something, but we're also saying yes to something. I mean, that happens to us all throughout the day, and we might feel guilty because we didn't go to meet this friend, but we decided to meet this friend. So we feel a little bit bad because we know the other friend was kind of going through something hard. You know what I mean? Like, this is just like a normal experience that we all have all the time.
Or we ate the piece of cake. And we said we weren't going to eat the cake, and we ate the cake. You know, like, it can be that innocuous. But I agree with you. I think like, and it took us the whole conversation to get here, but this is, I think, the important piece about abortion always, is that it is a gray area. Like, there's no way to say, is it right? Is it wrong? There's like, I don't think there's a way to measure that. And it's the same with like many things, right? Again, but it's like, there's no way to prove whether or not having an abortion is unethical or immoral. It depends on your belief system. And so when we get into all these like nuanced conversations around like, at what point is it a baby? And at what point are you murdering a baby? Like, that like is really actually extremely hard to decide. Like, outside the body, like full term pregnancy. Yes, sure. But you know, if we're talking about conversation on viability, like in some cases, a 24-week pregnancy, that, you know, fetus can survive outside the womb if a whole bunch of like high-tech medical interventions are in place, right? And in a lot of cases, like, that's not the point. And even, you know, I have a friend who talks about like, there's no, like, an infant is not viable. Again, not infanticide, but this concept of like, what is viability? An infant is only viable in the context of people wanting to take care of that infant. So it's not like, outside the body, it's good to go. It still requires like nurturing and care. But yeah, I think it is a gray area. Ending a pregnancy or choosing to like making the decision to end a pregnancy is inherently gray. And that's why people have all these like complicated feelings about it. And I think that's okay. I don't think there's a way for us to know for sure, right?
No, and I think it's like, for me, it's like, okay, like we're never going to get to the destination because we're just like, I don't even know what the destination, I mean, what's the destination? Like to get everyone on the same page? No, like, okay, like there are going to be people who having an abortion they'll never do it. That doesn't feel right to them. And that's great to know that about yourself. And if you have like the resources to be able to continue on in that pregnancy and the stamina and the strength and the know that like this is right for you, then that's great. But it's just about like opening like the ears and like widening the spaces of understanding for people and really just listening to people. Like that's sometimes just what it feels like it comes down to. It's like, and that sounds so like silly to say or like maybe like overused, but I think it's like not no one, but so many people aren't even listening to people explain their experience of having an abortion.
Yeah. Yeah. And
and like the complicated reasons and just like how much like, and for me, any abortion story I hear, all that happens for me, I'm like, gosh, like you just deserve like a big hug and like support and like,
yeah,
that's it.
Yeah. Well, and I think both of us, right, and the way that we offer care to people is just like, what do you need? Like all I can do is like try and help you get what you need in this moment. I am not God. I am not a judge. I'm not a like I'm none of these things. And it's just like, what do you need? You are a human being having this very human experience. How can we support you to make this a little less hard?
Yeah. And just also what you said, I think just like another important kind of to underline again, like you brought it up, just like how managing the outcome of pregnancy and abortion has just been going on and going on and going on and going on. And it's been a part of like our experience for however long and will continue to be a part of the experience.
Yeah. And it's not going anywhere.
Oh, no.
Like, regardless of what any like legislation is doing, it's not going anywhere. But yeah, it is like, I think talking about this as a birthright, which I love to say abortion as a birthright because
I love that.
It's very triggering for some people, but it is like if you have a body that has a uterus, like it is both like the getting pregnancy, the holding of a pregnancy and the releasing of a pregnancy. And those are things your body knows how to do. Your body has always known how to do this of both like get pregnant and not be pregnant and transfer from one state to the other. And that is normal and natural and able. Maybe you need support with that. And even something, and I'm sure this comes up as well, and not really the topic of what we're talking about, but when people I guess it is, but further down the line, right? So let's say someone is in a situation where in their earlier years, they had an abortion, or maybe they had 2 abortions because it wasn't the right time for them to be a parent. But then they try to get pregnant later on and struggle with getting pregnant. And there can be all kinds of guilt that comes up with that because of like, well, maybe I should have had, if I'd had that baby then I would have had a baby, or like, did I do something wrong that hurt my body that now I can't get pregnant? Is this a punishment because I didn't have these children earlier? And to say like, having an abortion does not impact your future fertility. That's not a thing. What can happen is like a full-term pregnancy, again, if one is like good or one is bad or one is however you want to consider it, hormones can like get weird. Your body can get weird. So there is like, maybe you need more support physically post-abortion, but having an abortion earlier in your life does not impact your future fertility. Now, are there feelings that might come up, and do those feelings play a role perhaps in like how we interact with our bodies and how we feel about our bodies on the like esoteric metaphysical level, right? Sure. But that's that can absolutely be part of someone's journey. Not to say that it is, or but and it's okay. You're deserving of support. You're deserving of what it is that you want. If you decide like you want to be a parent later on, like you are deserving of that, just because you decided that at this moment you weren't.
Absolutely. And I just want to say, like, I just want to just speak to like how the energy that it takes for people not to internalize the stories or the narratives that are out there about that you should be punished, that you are bad, that you're like all the bad things that you could say to someone who's had an abortion or who's deciding to have an abortion. It's like, it's sort of like this like part-time job of like making like a shield around yourself to not let that slip in. It's like, it's a very active process of saying like, I'm not going to like let that story in. I'm going to reframe my experience. I'm going to say what's true for me. I'm going to like be kind to myself, be compassionate. It's actually quite hard when really like there's so much going on out there that's saying otherwise. And even if you're doing everything that you can be doing to make sure that that narrative doesn't slip in, like, I mean, I know for myself, there are days where I'm feeling low or feeling sad. And then like, bam, I hear that voice comes in. That cultural, societal voice of like, you're bad, you should be ashamed, you're never going to do this, you're never going to be a mother. And like, it's really hard to constantly be in your own truth and experience and sort of like gentleness towards yourself, because it really is like a kind of like energetic and like an attack really on people who have had an abortion. So I just want to name like how it's tiresome.
Yeah.
It's tiring.
I think that's a great point. And I think especially wrapping it back again to the stigmas, this is where it is. Because there's still at this point in history, at this point in time, there is an assumption that at a certain point abortion is wrong. Mm-hmm. And I think that permeates basically how everyone thinks about and talks about abortion. Because when we're, in the conversations around law, even there should be like, well, there's no exemption, or there should be an exemption for like, sexual assault, like that's an okay instance to have an abortion. And this is an okay instance, but this is not an okay instance. And as long as there is a not okay instance, it will continue to be like abortion is wrong in some way.
Yep.
I fundamentally don't believe that. I think that it is a choice that you make, and it is between you and yourself and whoever else you want to involve. But truly, it's like you, yourself, and God, if you believe in God, whatever that is, right?
Yeah.
It shouldn't, again, if we're going to like talk about stigmas and why perhaps like maybe we should all examine our stigmas in this particular case. If you want to, you don't have to. But as long as there's like abortion is okay, if abortion is okay, but it will lead to that place of like someone perhaps having a moment of feeling there is something wrong with me. I've done something wrong, when you haven't. You are just a human being managing a human experience.
Sure. And I think just one other thing that I want to talk about is just like community care. And I think that there's, we talked about sometimes maybe even like the partner, the other person who was on the other side of the pregnancy doesn't know how to support the person who's had an abortion, that a lot of times friends don't either. And even your best of friends, people who support you no matter what and see you, like, again, like when, and tying it also back to grief, where grief is also this thing that's often really uncomfortable and really, like, we're not really quite sure, like, what's the right thing to say? Should I like put my hand on them? Should I not put my hand? Like, should I bring them flower? Like, what should I do? That even people with the best intentions sort of fall off. And they're, I think something I hear a lot is that people don't get checked in on after their abortion by their closest people. Because again, it's that like, it's that sort of timeline that really bugs me of like, the moment you terminate the pregnancy, the experience is over.
Yeah.
And it's not over. And sometimes asking someone a few months later, like, hey, how are you feeling? How are you feeling after your abortion? I know it was 6 months ago. I wonder how you're feeling. Mm-hmm. Whoa. I mean, that might just change your friend's life that day, because maybe no one has asked them how they're doing after their abortion. And maybe they're doing phenomenal. They want to say that. And maybe they're not doing so well. And actually they've been feeling really sad about it and really confused about this part that happened, or like, oh, wow, like reflecting on this other thing that happened after the abortion. And now I'm thinking about this for my future. Like, there's so much to be said. And that's like kind of what I'm talking about in the psychic gold. Like, there's so much information that we gain about ourselves.
Yeah.
And there's very little interest to hear about it from most people. But I think that if you ask someone, or you really sat and listened, like, you would learn so much about this friend of yours, or like the person that you love. And it would be no doubt in my mind, a rich conversation at the least.
I love that. Well, I think I'm gonna have us leave it there. Like, check in on your friends who've had abortions, have deep, rich conversations, have an open heart. Try to do your best to not be judgmental. We all do it at some point, but do your best. Is there anything else you'd like to leave people with, like resources? I mean, yourself, if you'd like to share how people can get in contact with you, if they'd like your wonderful services, or if there's other resources that you find to be really useful for people who are working on either integrating their own experience or want to support other people.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, I'll say, so for my services, you can find me at abortionwheel.com and also on my Instagram handle, which is abortionwheel. So that's for post-abortion services. And I'm still, Exhale is still a great service that's post-abortion as well that I always like to plug, because they do talk line and even texting, which is free, and it's nationwide in the US. I think it's like 1-888-EXHALE. I don't know actually the number off the top of my head, but it's something very straightforward like that. Just in terms of like really like access, being anonymous, being able to send a text message, being able to make a phone call, like they're still in service and doing their thing.
Excellent.
Yeah. And I don't have any other things that are jumping off the top of my head, because it's kind of like, you know, when someone asks you like, what's your favorite movie? And then you forget every movie you've ever seen.
Totally. That's fine.
It's kind of like that. So like, I can maybe send a list to you.
That's fine. Send that. Also follow Kristen on Instagram. I'm sure she'll share things over there as well. Well, thank you so much for being here. I know it's very late where you are, so thank you. This was wonderful. I hope this was helpful to those who are listening. Thanks for joining in the Clam Jam. We're a live event through my Patreon at The Consultant. So thank you to everyone. Thank you, Kristen. Have a lovely evening, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks, Vienna.
Your cunt is special, there's so much to love. You and your pussy should fit like hand in glove. Whether it belongs to you or your lover, there is so much to discover. See you next time, the Clam Jam's got you covered. The Clam Jam.